It was billed as the perfect crime and the crime of the century. The robbery. On the evening of January 17, 1950, employees of the security firm Brink Inc. in Boston, Massachusetts, were closing for the day, returning sacks of undelivered cash, checks, and other material to the company's safe on the second floor. Shortly before 7:30 p.m., they were surprised by 5 men, heavily disguised, quiet as mice, wearing gloves to avoid leaving fingerprints and soft shoes to muffle noise. The thieves quickly bound the employees and began hauling away the loot. Within minutes, they'd stolen more than $1.2 million in cash and another $1.5 million in checks and other securities, making it the largest robbery in the U.S. at the time. The investigation. As the robbers sped from the scene, a Brink's employee telephoned the Boston Police Department. Minutes later, police arrived at the Brink's building, and special agents of the FBI quickly joined in the investigation. At the outset, very few facts were available to the investigators. From interviews with the 5 employees whom the criminals had confronted, it was learned that between 5 and 7 robbers had entered the building. All of them wore Navy-type peacoats, gloves, and chauffeur's caps. Each robber's face was completely concealed behind a Halloween-type mask. To muffle their footsteps, one of the gang wore crepe-soled shoes, and the others wore rubbers. The robbers did little talking. They moved with a studied precision which suggested that the crime had been carefully planned and rehearsed in the preceding months. Somehow the criminals had opened at least 3 and possibly 4 locked doors to gain entrance to the second floor of Brink's, where the 5 employees were engaged in their nightly chore of checking and storing the money collected from Brink's customers that day. All 5 employees had been forced at gunpoint to lie face down on the floor. Their hands were tied behind their backs, and adhesive tape was placed over their mouths. During this operation, one of the employees had lost his glasses. They later could not be found on the Brink's premises. As the loot was being placed in bags and stacked between the second and third doors leading to the Prince Street entrance, a buzzer sounded. The robbers removed the adhesive tape from the mouth of one employee and learned that the buzzer signified that someone wanted to enter the vault area. The person ringing the buzzer was a garage attendant. 2 of the gang members moved toward the door to capture him, but seeing the garage attendant walk away, apparently unaware that the robbery was being committed, they did not pursue him. In addition to the general descriptions received from the Brink's employees, the investigators obtained several pieces of physical evidence. There were the rope and adhesive tape used to bind and gag the employees and a chauffeur's cap that one of the robbers had left at the crime scene. The FBI further learned that 4 revolvers had been taken by the gang. The descriptions and serial numbers of these weapons were carefully noted since they might prove a valuable link to the men responsible for the crime. In the hours immediately following the robbery, the underworld began to feel the heat of the investigation. Well-known Boston hoodlums were picked up and questioned by police. From Boston, the pressure quickly spread to other cities. Veteran criminals throughout the United States found their activities during mid-January the subject of official inquiry. Since Brink's was located in a heavily populated tenement section, many hours were consumed in interviews to locate persons in the neighborhood who might possess information of possible value. A systematic check of current and past Brink's employees was undertaken. Personnel of the 3-story building housing the Brink's offices were questioned. Inquiries were made concerning salesmen, messengers, and others who had called at Brink's and might know its physical layout as well as its operational procedures. An immediate effort also was made to obtain descriptive data concerning the missing cash and securities. Brink's customers were contacted for information regarding the packaging and shipping materials they used. All identifying marks placed on currency and securities by the customers were noted, and appropriate stops were placed at banking institutions across the nation. Hundreds of dead ends. The Brink's case was front-page news. even before Brinks Incorporated offered a $100,000 reward for information leading to the arrest and conviction of the persons responsible. The case had captured the imagination of millions of Americans. Well-meaning persons throughout the country began sending the FBI tips and theories, which they hoped would assist in the investigation. For example, from a citizen in California came the suggestion that the loot might be concealed in the Atlantic Ocean near Boston. A detailed survey of the Boston waterfront previously had been made by the FBI. Former inmates of penal institutions reported conversations they had overheard while incarcerated which concerned the robbing of Brinks. Each of these leads was checked out. None proved fruitful. Many other types of information were received. A man of modest means in Bayonne, New Jersey, was reported to be spending large sums of money in nightclubs, buying new automobiles, and otherwise exhibiting newly found wealth. A thorough investigation was made concerning his whereabouts on the evening of January 17, 1950. He was not involved in the Brinks robbery. Rumors from the underworld pointed suspicion at several criminal gangs. Members of the Purple Gang of the 1930s found that there was renewed interest in their activities. Another old gang that had specialized in hijacking bootlegged whiskey in the Boston area during Prohibition became the subject of inquiries. Again, the FBI's investigation resulted merely in the elimination of more possible suspects. Many tips were received from anonymous persons. On the night of January 17, 1952, exactly 2 years after the crime occurred, the FBI's Boston office received an anonymous telephone call from an individual who claimed he was sending a letter identifying the Brinks robbers. Information received from this individual linked 9 well-known hoodlums with the crime. After careful checking, the FBI eliminated 8 of the suspects. The 9th man had long been a principal suspect. He later was to be arrested as a member of the robbery gang. Of the hundreds of New England hoodlums contacted by FBI agents in the weeks immediately following the robbery, few were willing to be interviewed. Occasionally, an offender who was facing a prison term would boast that he had hot information. "You get me released, and I'll solve the case in no time," these criminals would claim. One Massachusetts racketeer, a man whose moral code mirrored his long years in the underworld, confided to the agents who were interviewing him, "If I knew who pulled the job, I wouldn't be talking to you now because I'd be too busy trying to figure a way to lay my hands on some of the loot." In its determination to overlook no possibility, the FBI contacted various resorts throughout the United States for information concerning persons known to possess unusually large sums of money following the robbery. Racetracks and gambling establishments also were covered in the hope of finding some of the loot in circulation. This phase of the investigation greatly disturbed many gamblers. A number of them discontinued their operations. Others indicated a strong desire that the robbers be identified and apprehended. The mass of information gathered during the early weeks of the investigation was continuously sifted. All efforts to identify the gang members through the chauffeur's hat, the rope, and the adhesive tape which had been left in Brinks proved unsuccessful. On February 5, 1950, however, a police officer in Somerville, Massachusetts, recovered one of the 4 revolvers that had been taken by the robbers. Investigation established that this gun, together with another rusty revolver, had been found on February 4, 1950, by a group of boys who were playing on a sandbar at the edge of the Mystic River in Somerville. Shortly after these 2 guns were found, one of them was placed in a trash barrel and was taken to the city dump. The other gun was picked up by the officer and identified as having been taken during the Brinks robbery. A detailed search for additional weapons was made at the Mystic River. The results were negative. Through the interviews of persons in the vicinity of the Brinks offices on the evening of January 17, 1950, the FBI learned that a 1949 green Ford stake body truck with a canvas top had been parked near the Prince Street door of Brinks at approximately the time of the robbery. From the size of the loot and the number of men involved, it was logical that the gang might have used a truck. This lead was pursued intensively. On March 4, 1950, pieces of an identical truck were found at a dump in Stoughton, Massachusetts. An acetylene torch had been used to cut up the truck, and it appeared that a sledgehammer also had been used to smash many of the heavy parts, such as the motor. The truck pieces were concealed in fiber bags when found. Had the ground not been frozen, the person or persons who abandoned the bags probably would have attempted to bury them. The truck found at the dump had been reported stolen by a Ford dealer near Fenway Park in Boston on November 3, 1949. All efforts to identify the persons responsible for the theft and the persons who had cut up the truck were unsuccessful. The fiber bags used to conceal the pieces were identified as having been used as containers for beef bones shipped from South America to a gelatin manufacturing company in Massachusetts. Thorough inquiries were made concerning the disposition of the bags after their receipt by the Massachusetts firm. This phase of the investigation was pursued exhaustively. It ultimately proved unproductive. Nonetheless, the finding of the truck parts at Stoughton, Massachusetts, was to prove a valuable break in the investigation. 2 of the participants in the Brink's robbery lived in the Stoughton area. After the truck parts were found, additional suspicion was attached to these men.